Cool. Right. Sian and Marika, thank you for joining us for a little deep dive into the UK cannabis industry and the Cannabis Trades Association. So firstly, big thank you to both for taking the time to walk us through all of this, what's going on in the sector, and kind of like show what's going on behind the scenes, really, because I don't think many people really appreciate or know what really goes on in terms of industry representation, I guess, as well, discussions with government institutions, politicians. You get inquiries from all over the place, Australia, the other end of the world, in fact.
Yes.
And so I thought, and one thing I will add to this as well is CTA are also winners of the Green Shield Award for all their hard work that they do behind the scenes, represent patients and really kind of advocate for all sides in the industry conversation and in the policy conversations as well. So thank you, Sian and Marika, and congratulations as well. And so maybe a little start off, easy warm up of what brought you into the cannabis industry, and then same for Sian as well.
All right, I'll kick off. My name's Marika. I work for the Cannabis Trades Association. I am one of two executive directors, and I'm chairman of the board. Our board consists of non-executive members from industry. The Cannabis Trades Association is an industry association purely, and we are stakeholder to government on that basis. We are literally the only trade body that deals with industrial hemp, CBD and nootropics, and all forms of medicinal cannabis. So we operate right across the board, not only in the UK, not only in Europe, but across the world. So we have roughly, at any given time, 200 members. 70% of them are based in the UK. Most of them came from the CBD sector and now have diversified into other areas. How did I come into this industry? Well, it's all Sian's fault, I have to say. It's Sian all the way. I had retired from the paper-making industry at about 45 years of age, traveled the world with my husband, built a house, as you do, and then languishing in COVID, I was bored silly. I've known Sian for a good number of years, and I received a phone call from her. And I said, of course I'll come and help you. And here I am over 5 years later. And in fact, the CTA is 10 this year. And I think we should have a special club for the club of 2016 when this industry really started roaring. That's how I came to this. Sian.
Thank you, Marika.
Well, I'm Sian Phillips, Sian to everybody else. And I'm the PR and comms director or executive director for the CTA. So not only do I do the PR and comms, I do the tech in the background. I support Marika because policy and strategy are a part of PR and comms, and she takes the lead on that. I assist on that. It was 11 years ago I got diagnosed with fibromyalgia and got into CBD. I formed a Facebook group which barreled to about 49,000 members in 2018. But in the meantime, I'd set up a small business, retired from being a musician, set up a small business, joined the CTA in 2017. By 2018, I was made a director. And then in 2020, I became an exec director. And I phoned up Marika and said that I'd love her to come in on board with her skills. And between us, we have a wealth of knowledge and skills and practicalities. Neither of us own a cannabis business anymore. I closed mine because then that stopped the glass ceiling of confidentiality.
I personally believe that a trade organisation has to be an independent thing. It has to act for its members and the best interests of the industry, and it should be the bridge between regulators and governments in a clear and easy way that they can trust. No, the CTA is the bridge between industry, and that is cannabinoid industry in its widest sense, and regulators and governments. Part of our job is to try to, wherever possible, harmonise where regulation sits across the whole of, the whole of Europe. because then that is a larger market into which everybody can import and export with ease. So part of that is the international perspective, part of it is the local or UK perspective. And these two things can quite often be in conflict. So part of our job is to make it as light touch as it can be, given that we want to have patients safe and consumers safe, to employ science and actual knowledge of science wherever possible, because there's an awful lot of hearsay going on and there's a lot of disinformation that goes on just because of the word cannabis. So our job is in a way to normalize those discussions and help people and, the wider governments understand that it is just another thing, like a blue opium poppy is opium, but it has many uses. Cannabis is just another plant with many uses.
We're here to normalize things.
And a great job you're doing, ladies. Thank you. I thought then, just picking up on a few things you mentioned, cannabis has been in the news quite recently, and I think maybe that's the best place to start, is what people are seeing in the media at the moment. And obviously, we know there's quite a varying degree of perspectives on cannabis, both medically, politically, and kind of at a patient consumer level as well. But perhaps, as we've had quite a few discussions in the sector and industry last week or two with some of the most recent news articles that have come out around cannabis and kind of voicing some of the concerns and the classic concerns that people often pose to any kind of cannabinoid research or medicine, would you mind walking us through some of those quickly without, it's up to you if you want to name the papers and where they are so people can find them, but
happy to do so.
That'd be a really worthwhile conversation. Great starting point.
Okay, so basically it's clickbait and rage bait now. We've tried to reach out to these newspapers so that they get their facts right and they don't put a picture of a blunt on the page. They don't get it wrong, but they continue to do so to enrage people, to enrage those users, to enrage the industry. And it doesn't matter how hard you try. I've given up trying now. So I will be ignoring from future anything to do with said newspaper. They failed again, and they constantly do so because their numbers are dwindling. So it's not my responsibility to keep those numbers up or to educate them, because we have tried. There's plenty of good knowledge out there for them, but they insist on going back to the same 1930s narrative of reefer madness.
My view on a particular article that appeared fairly recently is slightly different. I thought, well, given their size of readership and given the fact that they're now going to have an awful lot more people interested in clicking on this story, it did two things. It said, do you know, as just an ordinary person, you can have access to medical cannabis, and this is how you do it. So actually, I'm sort of the opinion that all news, regardless of how it is probably good news at the end of the day. The more discussion we have around the topic, the easier it becomes to discuss the topic. The nonsense about these stigmatisms just goes away. I mean, Sian and I, only last week, we gave a talk to a WI branch, a local WI branch. Firstly, that the hall was packed, which I found fascinating. Secondly, the questions were really good. We had retired lady neurosurgeon there. We had all sorts of people with various ailments. We had a Medcan patient, a young woman who'd actually used medical cannabis root to prevent, she was an addict for other things, and she used medical cannabis to normalize her life and get a job, hold down a job and go back into society. So cannabis has a huge interest based. It's just nobody really knows how to talk about it. And partly that's where your organization comes in, Chris, because in fact, if anybody does any of your courses, which we advocate everybody should, then we'll all be talking the same language in the right way. As for the rest of the newspaper as well. You know, they've got their problems. Don't make them mine.
I think you made a great point there, ladies, in that I think oftentimes people take the newspapers for gospel and maybe don't appreciate how those narratives or those kind of conversations sometimes really don't line up with the actual fact. And I think everyone's seen for the last couple of years now that there are a couple of media groups where they'll intentionally kind of like blur the lines.
Yeah.
And it's not that cannabis is this kind of like simple binary conversation. There's a lot of nuance to it. And like you say, it seems the appeal now is more towards the kind of clickbait, what's going to hook people. Because honestly, I've just looked at the article there and some of the other articles on cannabis. A lot of them are just the same regurgitated, it's the same false narrative almost every couple of months, every 6 months, every 3 months. It gets span out and it kicks up a controversy. And I don't know if it's a tool to then say to the politicians, hey, look, there's issues here. We've got to talk about it. It's in the news, or what the kind of benefit is. But it's an interesting...
It's a regurgitated narrative, just the same as they put out that we're going to get snow in November and they're reporting it in September. How could they actually know? I mean, it is just something you can throw out there. And it doesn't even have to be true nowadays. And that's the annoying thing, but people pick up on it. Now, what I said compared to Marika, I'm talking on behalf of the industry. I think the industry can ignore what is being said and not rise to bait it. I think that patients who have had different experiences with medical cannabis, by all means, call the articles out, and because then that does create a dialogue for other patients, you know, because they can see other patients. But it's pointless. I think it's pointless the industry responding to these articles on the basis that we've got better things to do.
Also, we're just feeding yet another algorithm online.
Yes.
Negative news creates many more clicks than a positive news story.
Yeah.
So the best we can do is occasionally feed the odd good news story, and most of all, just get everybody talking about it. Yeah, and I'm with Sian. I think we should not overreact to these things.
I was just thinking there as well. In a way, I think some of these articles just kind of, and maybe why patients take it so personally, is it's almost delegitimizing their legitimate medical necessity, and not doing so, and not almost intentionally kind of obfuscating, hey, the actual genuine.
What they're saying of genuine medical patients is actually these people like the security of having a medical prescription, but actually they're just doing it for recreational purposes. Yeah. That is absolutely not true.
I mean, and also when you have the legacy users coming over to becoming medicinal cannabis patients, these people, most of them, and I speak quite happily for most of them, have been using cannabis for years because they had an underlying need to. They were self-medicating.
Ultimately, why I wanted to ask you guys, I think that you've probably got the best perspective and receive the most different opinions as well, to then be able to actually like informedly talk about some of and break down the article itself and then the response to the article that goes out. You mentioned briefly what the government actually says, and maybe that's a good time in the conversation to talk a bit about maybe the Home Office and the Food Standards Agency and the ACMD as well, if you want to, and maybe just explain for people what each of those government offices do, and maybe your experience as well, and why, and some of the nuances of that, because it's quite there's multiple layers to it, and then also you get all the different perspectives on it. Mm-hmm. You've spoken to these agencies firsthand. Yeah. Where are they up to, and who are they?
Sean's going to take a bit of the history, I suspect.
Okay, so the FSA was established in 2000, the Food Standards Agency, and they deal with food. They don't deal with anything else, no tobacco or vape products. No, that's just food. Anything that goes in your mouth, apart from medicines that go in your mouth. They don't do that. They also deal with wellness products and supplements, right? So they look at kind of the legitimacy of the food. Now, we've got a historic, recipe book. But there are some things that come through that are new and fandangled and extracted and mixed with or bred. So, for example, what I'm talking about is insect proteins and lab-created meats. So they have to go, before they come to market, they go through a process called the novel foods process. And that's what the CBD, the cannabinoid sector, has been dealing with on the food side of things. Now, prior to 2018, CBD didn't fall into any particular category. And in 2016, about 20 companies got a 165 notice from the MHRA. And they were saying, basically, you cannot make medical claims on this. And all of a sudden, it was passed to the FSA, or was it? Or it became a borderline product. And there is a borderline team at the MHRA. And it's basically, they turn around to people and say, don't make medicine claims on or medical claims on your product. So CBD wasn't actually recognized as a food product or a wellness product until around 2017-18. Yeah. So that's then things are starting to separate, because at the end of 2018, of course, we had medical cannabis becoming legal. And then you definitely had a food sector. And then because, I've always known CBD to be the black sludgy stuff. But you had new products of CBD coming in, the isolates, the distillates, etc., and the new and other cannabinoids, including CBG, CBDA. It continues. So the FSA are responsible for food and new food products coming into the market. So that's my bit on the FSA. Then you go to the MHRA, which is the Medicines, Healthcare and Regulatory Authority. And they deal with medicines and medical devices. So a medical device could actually be something like a syringe, because you're using it to deliver a medicine. This one, in fact, is for a food supplement. It's my CBD syringe. So, but it could be patches, transdermal patches. Anyway, I'm going to hand over to Marika now, because she's dealt with the MHRA more on the medical cannabis side.
Well, yes, okay, MHRA, there are issues at the moment, because obviously if you have medical cannabis, things like trialing medical cannabis and getting data that the MHRA can trust is difficult. So there's a process for pharmacies, there's a process for clinics and so on, and manufacturers of medical cannabis. And each one varies very subtly, because if you're in medical cannabis, you're dealing with the Home Office under drug regulation, which is still there and draconian. And they also hold the licenses for going out to manufacturers and checking them and, giving them the license at the end of the day. Unfortunately, in the UK, that can take upwards of 2 years to obtain. And yet, if you went and set up in somewhere like the Czech Republic, you could in fact set up and get your licenses, full drug licenses, and therefore be able to import or export into the UK within 8 weeks. So I think a pretty big amount of reform needs to go on there. Licenses, they hold, if you like, all of the licenses that are made for medical purposes. The MHRA then will grant their licenses to manufacturing or whatever the process is. And they are in all over control of how the medicines are deployed. Right? So the MHRA only think of things like drugs. Is it above a certain limit? It's therefore not a food, it is a drug. However, I have to tell you, the Home Office is also involved in, get this, licensing low THC hemp to farmers. Firearms licensing. Who would have thought it? So it has incredible licensing power, but it doesn't have an awful lot of a team to do it. And honestly, the CTA feels that in some instances where something is a low-risk product, such as hemp or hemp derivatives, including CBD, these licenses should be handed to the more relevant regulators. In the case of CBD, it would be the Food Standards Agency. In the case of licenses for farmers to grow hemp, that would obviously sit with DEFRA. Yeah. So there's a bit of work to be done here in untangling these things. The MHRA, they have been a rather secretive group up until now, difficult to speak to, as well as the Home Office, whereas we've noticed in the last 18 months, the FSA have gone great strides to be much more transparent and much more engaged with stakeholders and people going through the novel food process. It came as a bit of a shock to us, therefore, that we discovered that there's this thing called the SPS agreement, which sits between the European Union and the UK, which they're currently negotiating for all foods and agricultural products between the UK and Europe. And in effect, for CBD type products and supplements, it could mean that if the novel food process falls into those discussions, the FSA would lose their own legitimacy and be under the EFSA, which is the European Food Standards Agency, which would be absolutely catastrophic for CBD products at this juncture. So we are doing a hard rearguard action against that happening, because as Sian already mentioned, there are other sectors who are involved in the novel food process. So we are all banding together to try to ensure that the novel food process, as writ and acted on by the FSA, falls outside the scope of the discussions of the SPS agreement. I'm sorry, these things become very complicated very quickly. I guess the other one was the ACMD, which is the scientific team who judge the safety and security of either CBD products or, sorry, not CBD products, for medicinal products in the UK. And they are a group of scientists taken usually from academia, but in the past actually came from the science base of the Home Office, which is a bit ridiculous when you're trying to judge the risk factors associated with a food, because you're wearing the wrong hat and you have the wrong training. So part of the problem that we have with the regulatory difficulties in the UK as they stand today stemmed from the ACMD and its composition originally. So when CBD was judged to be a food by government, they didn't have anybody with the knowledge for CBD or cannabinoid products. So they reached over to COT, who are the science team related to drug science, through the Home Office, and requested that 9 of their members come over and be part of an 11-person team judging whether CBD is a dangerous product or not. Of course, we now know, with extensive trials and the fact that there have been no food incidents involving CBD whatsoever, 0, in the time that this entire process had been running. So to quote the Chief Science Officer, he already recognizes that. So I think now there's a lot of regulatory reform happening actually at DCIT, which is the Department for Science, Industry and Technology, run by Peter Kyle, who are looking at how these regulations are in fact impacting industry growth. And this is a very pivotal time for the UK. So I have spent, since October, writing the letters to make the point that this needs to be changed dramatically and soon, please. Because interestingly, I suspect that the UK is in absolutely prime position, not only for medical cannabis policy reform, but also for food reform. And that includes new pathways for animal medicine, animal wellness products rather than medicines. And the VMD will probably have to amend themselves to come into line with that. It's a very interesting time. It's all a bit fluid. We usually start, help with the start of the process, but what is ultimately decided doesn't involve the CTA, and we then negotiate some more. And each thing is incremental. It has to be based on knowledge, science, empirical data. So those are the areas that we're currently working on.
Marika touched on the VMD, the Veterinary Medicines Directorate, and I just have to say that we are a nation of animal lovers. At this presentation that we gave to the WI, I'd say that at least 20% of the questions that I was asked afterwards were about cats, dogs and horses, goats and donkeys. I have to mention that one.
But it just means that this is a simple plant, but complex uses.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you should choose a pathway or a regulatory system that suits each strand adequately and doesn't contradict what I would call international protocols as well. And here is an instance for you. If you look at the common agricultural policy across Europe at the moment, they are including industrial hemp in this protocol. So in other words, farmers will get a subsidy for growing hemp across Europe. But they have an anomaly, and the anomaly is this, that at the moment, the regulation in certain countries says that they can't use leaf and flower. So that is currently going through the legal process, as in the court process, to allow that to happen. When that does happen, part of the SPS agreement that the UK and Europe are discussing could be beneficial to full plant, full spectrum oils and products made from hemp. So I never close my ideas down to just UK or how this could not benefit the UK. So that's just an example for you.
Thank you, ladies. Beautiful. It was very concise, whether you thought it was concise or not. And to simplify a kind of complex network of organizations is quite difficult. So hats off to you there. That's probably the best description I've heard of the three bodies and how they kind of interact. If you had to kind of pin down and kind of explain to people the impact that some of these policies are having on companies at the moment, what would you say are the biggest complaints you hear from the industry and the companies that are having to sort of follow these rules, and how much of a almost disadvantage do you think it's putting the UK sector at as well at the moment?
Well, on the CBD side, it's stagnated, and that is the word that we've been banding around for the past 3 years. The novel food process for CBD has been ongoing for coming up to 7 years now. Started in 2019. The gates closed, so to speak, in early 2020, and now we're in 2026. So it has been really damaging for business. Last year, growth duty came into being through the 2015 Deregulation Act, where government departments have to get they have to untangle some of their red tape, basically, to allow UK businesses to thrive, and they're not thriving at the moment because of all this red tape, and I'd call it I would call them draconian ideals on plant-based medicines.
From my point of view, I always think of these things as, if you have a clear regulatory pathway, and the MHRA is a very good example of this, then it's easier for business to follow it. There are tram lines. It's when there's vagary around, say, how the novel food process was applied to CBD products, and the 16 plus changes that have happened during this period, and the fact that when CBD companies were asked to go into the process, they had a finite amount of time to gather data. They needed data. They couldn't get it, so they bought into other people's data. Now, the difficulty now lies, as the safety assessment process continues for products, that it's patently obvious that some of these dossiers, the data dossiers, do not fit the people who paid to have their products in them. Now, this causes huge problems, not just for the regulator, but actually for the industry itself. I will concede that some companies cynically did that so that they could continue to trade under the novel food agreement with the CBD sector. But we're now at the dangerous point where we're either going to lose a lot of those products that sit on the public list at the FSA, or what we try to do is find means for companies where the data that they've relied on so far doesn't quite fit their product type, to be able to move, to switch to a dossier where they're likely to get an approval for. So, it's not sleight of hand. I would say, if there are very clear, strict guidelines about what is required for a medical product or a CBPM, which is a special cannabis product, it's actually straightforward. Companies know exactly where they stand. They know how long the process is going to take. They know the costs involved. They know the targets that they have to reach, the milestones to get there. When it's more open and there doesn't appear to be regulatory teeth behind it, in other words, enforcement teeth, then people will continue to do whatever people continue to do. And part of that is industry needs to shape up, grow up, shape up, stop making medical claims about a wellness product, because that falls into the remit of MHRA. So if you're making a medical claim, you're a medical product. If you're just saying, hi, it's a supplement, it's something that you can eat alongside of food stuff, it's ingested, but that's different. Okay. So I know that people have been blurring the lines, and I'm saying straight to camera, everybody needs to straighten up on this now, because it will cause regulators to over-regulate. If you get a grip now, then everything else will start working the way it should.
Can I just interject and say an example might be that CBD might get taken on by the MHRA, become a medicine, and then you'll all have to go through medical trials. And even after that, you will not be allowed to make medical claims on a medicine or advertise it in the UK.
I wonder, ladies, then, because I think a lot of the companies don't really appreciate kind of almost like the policy dominoes that are falling at the moment and where those could kind of land. You've kind of painted a bit of a picture there, but how do you see this kind of unfolding, and what do you think the kind of stakes are at the moment? Because I think most companies have kind of become a bit apathetic, maybe, or they've just kind of disassociated completely because they don't really see the government as doing anything productive, useful, or they're impossible to engage with. They give you conflicting misinformation all the time, depending on who you connect with inside that agency.
Nebulous agency.
Yeah. do you think, and this is a bit of an add-on question then, do you think there's any opportunity to connect with some of the political parties as well? And given there's a bit of like a power realignment sort of going on at the moment, do you see there's any opportunities there that this could become like almost like a little political conversation? Or do you think, how do you think we move forward with this? Because everyone's kind of industry-wise is just getting a bit
tired,
disappointed.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
And I'll follow on.
So, with due respect to Marika, we are politically bipolar, and this helps our way of political thinking. She gets an idea from me, she gets an aspect from me, I get an aspect from her. But we both agree that governments move at a snail's pace. If they want something done, they'll get it done.
Yeah.
They'll get it done incredibly fast. But if they just want to bandy it around a bit to try and get some political leverage, they'll do that. However, that doesn't work for the normal human being on the street who just wants a decent paycheck with less taxes, etc., etc. But government moves at snail's pace. We have to cajole, we have to push up, we have to, I'm not going to say entice, because we do not do that. We show that there is an open need, and that not just that sector, it's a multi-sector benefit. So, for example, let's take hemp. It's a simple one. By getting rid of the hemp license, or making it so easy that farmers don't have to fill in forms, wait for a certain gap to find out if they've got the license, and then have literally only a few weeks to order the seeds to be planted straight in the ground for 100-day plant, and then to harvest it. And then with all that in mind, you have companies that do the processing, the decortication, the fiber stripping, the weaving, the whatever. They can only work to that season as well. So they may have equipment that's lying around dormant for 9 months of the year, because we can't have a license that runs, all the way through. Yes, you can plant it when you like, but nowadays we're seeing seed genomes that are now frost resistant, mold resistant. So actually the UK could have a 3-season hemp year. But at the moment, we've only got a 1-season hemp year, just because of the licensing and the way that things fall in getting one's license.
Yeah.
Yes, you get a license for 3 years, and then after that, was it 3? No, it's every year, but you're it. Anyway, so what I'm trying to say is, from hemp, you've got agriculture, you've got heavy industry, and then you have things like construction, you have things like bioplastics, you have there was another one I was going to come up with. You have the seed oil industry, obviously. You have things like tourism. This is an absolute new market that could be brought in that would generate more money, basically, for the government. Because that's what it is at the end of the day. It's the tax revenue. And there is a huge amount to be made on tax revenue on just the hemp industry alone. So by bringing that in.
So can I answer a bit of that?
Please, Marika, that's
right.
a great example though, Sian, because I don't think people realize how inefficient it is. Like, it's almost the more government intervention there is, the less that actually ends up getting done ever.
Yes,
progresses.
Absolutely.
I would say that is exactly it in essence. We are working quite hard because we found that the regulations in other countries like New Zealand, which are actually rather good, and Australia is rather good, and Switzerland in the past was rather good, they tended to have a thing called the Cannabis Office. And the Cannabis Office was the government centre that said, okay, what are the regulations? How do we facilitate this happening across the board? So we're pushing quite hard. I mean, I do think that this government, or the UK government over time, because it's not just this government, have moved quite far. But again, snail's pace. So to have a cannabis office, or indeed just a group of people who are responsible to report that to, the cabinet and make things happen, is, I think, imperative to make the best use of, the cannabis plant. I mean, ultimately, industry, society, health of nations, I mean, that sounds really cool, doesn't it? Better buildings, new material, and so many other things flow from cannabis. Our job partly is to open the conversation about it. The second thing for regulators is, if we can get in to discuss about how deregulation actually helps, then, and it's not dangerous and it's not risky, that there are enough parts in place to make sure that patients are safe and that consumers are safe. But when we're talking about a low-level risk product such as hemp or CBD or some of those supplements, you might as well just go away and do it. Fill the shops, make sure people are healthier for longer. Yeah. When it comes to drug interactions, or where it is, a medicine, I absolutely appreciate there are ways and means that are going on at the moment that really do not suit medical cannabis. Trials is the typical example of this. It is impossible, as we know, to do double-blind trials on a plant that has, 140 cannabinoids. And I'm sure you, Chris, can probably tell me much more about this than I can. But at the end of the day, it's impossible to isolate those things that made the difference in a single molecule type trial. It's impossible. The permutations literally come out into the millions. And the costs associated are far too high. So one of the things I heard in one of the, I do tend to go to most of the board meetings if I'm invited, or if I can get into them for as many organizations and regulators there can. And in the MHRA board meeting in July last year, I overheard something that really made my ears prick up. And they were talking about gene therapy and plant-based trials. Plant-based medicine trials. And I took that to mean immediately what we're talking about here. So the idea that was discussed, at least presented, was that say a group of people with certain conditions, and let's just take motor neurone disease as the typical one, different symptoms, but actually the same stem root cause. They would go into a teaching hospital under a consultant and be treated either with gene therapy, plant-based medicines, or a combination of the both, on the basis that whether the basis for judgment of whether it worked or not would be risk versus benefit to the actual patient in front of them. Now, the difficulty lies is, how do you quantify that information so that there is, data can be transported one to the other? And I think that is the big problem here. So part of the job I'm trying to do with you and with others is try to find out what this trial pathway looks like, how it's going to be implemented, and what methodologies are going to be used to gather the data. Because governments calm down if they have good quality data, and regulators calm down if they are given the truth through scientific data that doesn't contradict itself. Okay, so I see data as being the door opener to making this entire industry work properly over time, and to prevent over-regulation and, in fact, deregulation.
I'm a big fan of deregulation. I've got to say, at a certain point, how much can you legislate for? It's like, just let people do stuff, and there's already enough safety measures in there. Like a lot of the farmers with the farmers' protest, they just want to be able to put seeds in the ground and harvest food. Instead, it's got to be, you can only do it on this certain day with a certain genetic for a certain period, and if you don't have it all managed by then. You've got to use this exact fertilizer from this approved supplier, and it just becomes like, well, I've got land that I can't use because it's got to be all dependent on, say, an international supply chain of different approved products. So same for science. There's a lot of just also very slow, also very painful. And if you want to get a lot of basic research done, there's so much that could be moving through, that we could be kind of progressing through, that just kind of gets stifled and people give up, can't be bothered. And then you just end up doing like the government approved science that doesn't really move
or they run out of money. These things cost so much money and take up so much senior management resource within a company for such a long period of time. And if you're doing trials, there's no guarantee that you're going to get the absolute outcome that you would like. So the risk factors for people like investors, I mean, we deal a lot with investors and international companies wanting to get footholds or bridgeheads into various countries and sectors. So we deal a lot with investors, banking, insurance. And really, there is one thing that the government could do today that would make the biggest difference to just how this industry is opened up quickly and getting quality of information out of everybody, is for them to look at the Proceed of Crime Act today and make a proper exemption to it, which says, except for, this applies to all those bad companies, bad actors, except for those legal regulated hemp and cannabis companies operating in the UK. If that exemption could be put in today, I can assure you we would have money, investment, lots and lots of scope for trials. And I do think the UK is one of the key countries in the world for doing quality trials.
We've been asking for this since it was, I know my things. This is the Plan for a Legal and Regulated UK Hemp and Cannabis Sector. It was written in 2022.
End of 22. Yeah.
22. We've been asking for this since then, and it's available on the CTA website. I'll have to go looking for it, but it's
that's the text that is currently being used by our policymakers, and it's valid until 2027.
Yeah.
So it is the current thing that our policymakers are using for the facts and the figures.
There's about 18 months left on it, so it needs to be enacted on now.
Yeah. But I do see, so one of the things that gives me heart is I see that there's a convergence across regulation, not only here, but internationally. And now questions are being asked about, are these regulations too sturdy? Are they too robust? Are they not fit for purpose? And the answer we know, of course, is yes, they are. But we have to give good reason why they should be lightened up, that it's a light regulatory touch. And that's what we continue to do. And with help from industry members who have data and information and contacts, we do make the case. And I think we are at an inflection point now that is going to show change quite rapidly, because I believe the UK coffers need the revenue. Yeah.
We've touched on the international factor a couple of times there, and I was wondering, you go across Europe, you kindly invited me along to one of the New Zealand Trade Commission meetings.
Yes.
What and which kind of those international regulatory models do you think we could learn some practical lessons from? And then for the CTA, how are you using those international partnerships that you've got to kind of inform the domestic side of things? Because I think we've got so many like close relative countries that are part of the Commonwealth that are doing it completely differently and don't have the same issues we do. How do you see those kind of supporting us in a way? And how are you continuing to collaborate with those groups?
Yeah, well, so the first thing is we have other trade bodies, international trade bodies, who sit on our board. So we don't trade information in the sense they act on behalf of their members and so on. But if there is a way to collaborate, we do it universally as much as we possibly can. The second thing is that I would say there are some very good models out there. New Zealand, I think, is an absolute corker for medical cannabis trials, particularly, and how the rollout has happened and the de-risking of it and so on, and the fact that it can plug then into healthcare systems. Part of that, and you're going to laugh, it will be down to, I mean, not so much in the UK, but certainly abroad, part of people's, where they don't have the NHS, they have partly that is state-provided healthcare and partly private insured healthcare that they buy on top. Now, that's the case for most of the countries. We're slightly different in the UK. So it will matter, because if we can talk to the insurance companies for those people who have private healthcare and make sure that cannabis treatments can be part of the private healthcare offering, that's not a biggie, because they obviously do it for other countries abroad. If we can get that through, that's yet another access point that we're opening. In due course, NICE will be happy with whatever trials come along for plant-based medicines, but we're a long way away from that. So unless NICE change their protocols for testing and acceptance of new medicines to be used in the National Health Service, we've got some way to go. So it seems that we keep making sure that the data's there, the information's there, and then they will start looking. And also there will be a price here. And the price, there will be certain strains, certain products that reach the threshold quicker at a given price. And once that price is set, all of the external products around that price will start tumbling. So international trade bodies, we do delegations. So if a trade delegation is coming from a different country, they will contact the CTA and ask for us to help them with visits or help them at an exhibition to meet the right people and so on. Happily to do that. I've already mentioned that we have people sitting on our board who represent other trade bodies, both France, Germany, and the whole of Europe, in fact. So, we are open, we are transparent, people can come to our meetings and, they can ask us questions at any time, and we will try to help wherever possible. That's our standard default position, yeah? Because we all need to unite and do this properly.
Yeah, so let's go back to this cannabis office. It would be it would be a government office that represented the FSA, the MHRA, the VMD, the Home Office, because at the moment the Home Office are up to their necks. They're beyond up to their necks. In fact, they're drowning. Yeah. And the DFLU, the Drugs and Firearms Licensing Department, there are 5 people working, right? We'll count that at 220 days a year, right? Currently in the stocks are 3,000 license applications.
That is only for drugs licensing, not firearms licensing, where we've got about 1.5 million.
Yeah, so for drugs licensing. And that's all the little things like the pharmacies, the wholesale distributors, the manufacturers, and all of a sudden, 3,000 licenses divided by 5 people is 600 each. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. 600 each. 600 each in 220 days. They've got to be working on 3 a day. Minimum. That includes site visits, collating the dossiers of data and everything, and examining them and processing them. 3 dossiers a day.
It's not possible.
Impossible. Absolutely impossible. So a cannabis office would work so that cannabis would fall into a sector within that. The licensing would fall into a sector within that. And that could be medical cannabis licensing. It could be hemp licensing, definitely. But we thought about putting hemp licensing over to DEFRA. Why wouldn't you? I mean, it's a department, and it's not a high risk plant. You'd need to smoke half a field to get high, and even then, by which time you've done your lungs in. So it's not, and it's educating the policymakers to do that. I mean, when my previous constituency incumbent listened to me and then turned it around at the end of it and said, "Oh, cannabis will never be legalized. I'm a mother, don't you know?" And I went, "Well, I'm talking to a politician. Who are you now?"
Yeah.
So it's a case of, and oh, I know about hemp farms. Of course you do. You've been to one. So have I, many.
Yeah.
But you'll never get high smoking hemp. Huh.
So there's so many other things that we can probably touch on, but I would say good practice, international standards, harmonization of the industry across the globe is the way to go. This is an international business. It's huge international business.
Science and education will override, or should override, sort of like media hype, marketing, things like that. I mean, false news again versus science.
Mm-hmm.
You know yourself, Chris, about false news versus science.
I mean, to sort of sum it up, I guess, Chris, I was thinking, science engenders credibility. Credibility engenders trust. And those are the things that actually we need to bed down now as an industry, as regulators, and so on. If we do it right now, then this country will be literally the entrepot port for cannabis across the world. And that's how I feel about it. I know that sounds pretty highfalutin, but, we can do basic stuff like ensure that electronic prescribing for CBPMs is the DIN standard instead of paper-based models, and so on and so on. Those are the intricacies within the regulatory structure, but we need to think bigger, and government needs to think bigger, So that's where I'm at.
So my question for you now, ladies, then is sort of, I don't know how many MPs you must have spoken to between you, countless. How do you see, and what do you find have the most influence on those MPs? Where do you see the most progress being made? Because a lot of the time we do have, I mean, we've got how many evidence packs they've received, obscene, but in your experience, sort of, what could be done better? How do they perceive the cannabis industry? And then also, given the amount of work that you do for the industry in regard to connecting with those MPs, where are the opportunities, where are the challenges, and what does the industry need to know as well that they maybe don't appreciate?
Okay, in the last election, we saw over 50% new MPs, and each and every one of them came in with their own agenda. Mine in Oxfordshire here, North Oxfordshire here, came in with an agenda for housing. I went to see him, I spoke to him about hemp and hempcrete and hemp construction, but no, he was into housing. I haven't spoken to him since because he hasn't picked up the phone to me, and I've tried. And they do that, they cut you off. Just keep the conversation going. No, they've got their own agenda. And these new MPs do not know how to go beyond their own agenda. Well, it feels like that. How many new MPs join an APPG? Very few. They're told they've got to. They'll join a housing, anything to do with housing. They won't go outside their own little box. It's totally frustrating. They won't go outside their box, and they need to be educated. In fact, the government, these MPs go in and they don't know anything much about the politics. They've been councillors or on boards of councils and whatever, and They can't open their eyes up wide enough.
I think a politician's job is extremely difficult.
It is.
And until we have just standard discussions about cannabis as a plant, and therefore its different uses, and we avoid the discussion at this point about, are you going to legalize cannabis? The answer is, we're an industry body. There's not a benefit to any of our members or industry in the wider sense in legalizing cannabis, because you let go complete control. If you look what's happening in the Netherlands now with the coffee shops, they are now, the Netherlands government is now creating a monopoly, a state monopoly, with only 10 suppliers supplying those coffee shops. So there is a way that has failed. Yeah. So we keep, although we're happy to discuss, the legalization of cannabis in due course, I would very much see it as, we have lots of very good growers here in the UK. I would prefer for those individuals who are perhaps buying illicit, or you would call legacy product from around the bike shed, to not do that and actually be able to access it in a much more direct way that is healthier for them. And, we gain as a society from that. But that's one side. I happen to have been, I was involved in politics for a long time, just local politics. Most MPs who lost their seats or whatever have, the good ones, the ones who are ministers, are now in the House of Lords. And when a government is reticent to discuss policy changes and reform to cannabis, they are the people that we talk to, because the government is using those individuals to actually, what is the process? How should we do it? We can't be seen to do it, but if you go and do that on our behalf, we can sort of stand behind it. The process to get new laws enacted are very difficult. But there's a thing called secondary legislation, which I think we should use a lot more of, which means that if a regulation or a law is not fit for purpose, you can amend it under secondary legislation. And that will require just a simple vote in the House of Commons with a minister standing up making the changes. So we're because amending laws and regulations going through the whole parliamentary system takes too long, there are more and more amendments happening under secondary legislation. Now, the way that all businesses, all cannabis-related businesses and companies can help with the whole of this process is invite people to your site. Invite your MP. Invite, if you're Lib Dem area, invite, the Lib Dems county level to visit your facility. Sit them down, give them a coffee, whatever, and just talk about what you do, the jobs you bring to a place, the amount of money that they could be earning from this, and the fact that they should support it. And even better if you manage to get a photo of them in front of it. So, we write to MPs. We are part of all party parliamentary groups. I think they're difficult at the moment because they're quite costly to run. And there doesn't appear to be enough parliamentary time for parliamentary members of all party parliamentary groups to ask questions on the floor of the House. So they're useful, but they don't have the power that they once had maybe 3 or 4 years ago.
They changed the rules in 2024 as well. So instead of having 6 MPs, you now need 20
to form an all-party parliamentary group. And of course, anything related to cannabis, everybody prefers not to use the word cannabis. The CTA was part of a founding member of the original CBD APPG, which was remarkably effective, which has now morphed into one which is to do with industrial hemp. carbon credits and the rural economy. And then there's a separate group that do with drug reform. But of course, cannabis doesn't just sit in front of drug reform or industrial hemp. It's something bigger. And that is more difficult to create an APPG from. So we rely on people we know, sympathetic ears, as we've discovered them to be over time. I mean, Sian and I were at a show in November, and David Willits, who's now outside government, who's Lord Willits, Lord David Willits, came over and said hello to us. Actually, it wasn't David Willits, it was Thingy.
Matt Hancock.
It was Matt Hancock, sorry. We're going to have to do that again. So, as an example, there are some MPs who are now outside politics, and Matt Hancock, who was a Conservative MP, Sian and I bumped into him at a trade show that we were at, White Label Show in November. And he recognized me from my past and came over and said, "Oh, hello, really nice to see you. Oh, by the way, you're doing great things for cannabis." Now, in a strange way, those are the plaudits that Sian and I breathe from, because we know...
Yeah, we know we're getting a little badge.
And it's also very lovely to get things like the occasional award, and thank you for that. Very sincere. I have to
congratulations. Thank you. No.
I did cry.
Both did.
We both did. So thank you for that. So we're doing so much, but it's slow and it's complicated and it's disjointed. But I see regulatory reform as being more like a stream, more like a river. It may change course for a while. It may be dammed for a while, as in Beaver Dam, not be dammed. But it will still be flowing towards the sea. And I want everybody to feel that.
But very insightful, Marika, thank you. And Sian, for walking us through kind of how those kind of conversations work, and then also getting inside the mind of the MPs that a lot of these companies are trying to speak to and liaise with. You've mentioned a big part of developing the sector further now is just engagement, but also education and helping people understand and kind of work through a lot of the myths and concerns that they've maybe had as sort of preconceptions about cannabis. You run some beautiful events, and I thought maybe if you could walk us through some of those events that you have done, just in terms of bringing the industry together for members, but then also educational events, and maybe some of the events that are coming up over the next couple of weeks and months that people could come and engage with and interact with and get a bit of a taste for what the industry has to offer, but then also the educational benefits as well of a lot of these that kind of upskill the companies and just give people a bit more material to work with in their day-to-day.
Well, Marika touched on, we did the White Label World Expo back in November, and we were one of 4 cannabis organizations. We were a trade association. There were 3 other companies that were either manufacturing or producing CBD supplements, etc., etc. So, and they were glad to see us. They were glad to. Well, 2 out of 3 were glad to see us there. And we spoke to. We thought we'd have an easy time with it. We got the chance to actually have a stall there, and it was a last minute thing, and it was a dropout, so we just took the stall. I thought, oh my gosh, we're just at the speaker one presentation slot. I thought we're never going to be heard. Actually, we were visible. The fact that we had Cannabis Trades Association branded behind us. We had so many sniggers. People were looking at me as if to say, "Are you going to sell me something?" No, not in the least, I said. So we had literally 6 days to put this thing together, drag the stand out of the garage and revamp it. And we were inundated. We rocked on up at 10 o'clock. Now, people who normally build stands and get there about 9 o'clock, ready to put stuff out and prepare themselves. We rocked up at 10 o'clock and we didn't stop until 3 o'clock that day. We were just solid. We barely got a chance to get some glasses of water in. I survived on a box of Quality Street, I think. And sorry, that's brandy. But we spoke to people who wanted to get into the industry. We spoke to people who wanted to become medicinal cannabis patients, who were interested in finding more about medicinal cannabis. Again, I'd like to say thank you to British Cannabis for giving us a ton of goodie bags at very short notice, who actually turned up on the day as well. So what we do for members at those events is we say, we've got a member that does that, or we've got several members that do that, and we can write down their names and pass their names on, which is giving them some, small amount of retail marketing maybe, but out of that, there are some fantastic relationships that go on. Future people become not just customers, other business become clients, and it develops. And the business advice we give as well. I'm thinking of starting up, and I'm having trouble with banking. That's another thing we can offer. Not banking ourselves, obviously, but through another associate member. Insurance. We have all these wonderful associates who support us, and they become sponsors to events. So we've got another event coming up now. This is February 2026, and it's the Medical Mixer, and it's mainly for high level. It's a high level event basically, so it's not for patients as such. It's for industry, and we've had sponsors coming in for that as well. In March we have our AGM, and just before the AGM, the night before, we have one of our B2B networking events in the Lucky Pig in Fitzrovia in London, and we've run 3 of them already, and they're great. It's a great place to just have a chat, meet people, and this is open to patients, and this is open to clinicians and care providers within the cannabis industry as well. So we're finding that patients are coming in, and we're getting growers. We ran one back in June last year, and we had medicinal cannabis growers from all around the world. The New Zealand guys turned up, the Irish guys turned up, the South Africans turned up,
Canadians.
The Canadians. It was something else, that particular networking meeting. So we'll have another one of them in May, and it falls around the time of Cannabis Europa. So it's all on the CTA website, and tickets are still on sale now, which is great. I also have to mention that we do a couple overseas as well. We go to ICBC in Berlin. Hello, Alex Rogers. You're amazing. You run a great event, and the amount of networking and representation of our members that we do at these events is phenomenal. And I think we could probably say we're in the millions mark now.
Easy.
And so we will be going to Cannabis Europa this year. There's excuse me. So yes, we will be going to Cannabis Europa this year. We will be going to ICBC this year. We've got another event lined up in November, which is kind of the end of year event, but it's fabulous. It's wonderful. It's a pre-Christmas, networking and drinks, and it's all very, very relaxed, and
good fun.
You get goodie bags when you turn up as well, but they don't include paper hats. Sorry.
Well,
but you get lots of other benefits anyway. There's
well, our members get loads. So Sian is being a bit demure here, and not only does she sort out all the events and make sure that the CTA can afford to do them, because these things are never cheap, really, if you want to do it well. We produce toolkits for our members, and these toolkits are available to anybody. So if you've got a particular issue with a regulatory process or whatever it is, guarantee you will find the right toolkit to tell you how to do it on our website, which is www.cannabistrades.org. We do updates. We have working groups, which we call strategic sector committees. Now, the reason that they differ from other people's working groups is there's always a board member sitting on them. We do all the admin chores for it, and that information is taken directly to the board, and then Sian and I are instructed to go off and do it. Just do it. So it's a very fast process. It's a very direct process. And again, all of those working groups are open to all comers. Yep. So speed of response and things like standards, harmonization, and so on, and training, we support. So there's a lot there for members who want to know more. There's a lot for people outside the industry to tap into. So part of the thing that we do for our Normalizing Cannabis is we've been working on a series of documents and policy documents for use in, say, hospital trusts when cannabis patients are patients and how they should be treated in those circumstances. We were involved in the one that has just come out recently, I think just before Christmas, which was the police and actually the legal systems in the UK were getting rather overburdened with poor cannabis patients being picked up for supply and being, under the influence of cannabis. So that was causing a lot of friction because, of course, it wasn't true, and yet the police forces were rather overreacting. So they've been given now a set of guidelines that we absolutely 150% endorse, where it says, if this person absolutely proves they are a cannabis patient, then, use your common sense in that regard. I mean, obviously, you can't drive impaired, okay? That's the law. So no cannabis patient should be doing that. But that aside, it is not right for people to be questioned and then taken in under custody for all the wrong reasons. And the police were unhappy about it. Obviously, the courts were unhappy about it. So hopefully a bit of pragmatism where it matters will make all the difference. So we're very open, we're transparent. All the meetings, apart from our board meetings, are open meetings, including our AGMs. We don't try to hide anything. We learn from our mistakes or blunders. And someone has to lead, I guess. And we try to do it without being overburdensome about it. So everyone's welcome. All thoughts, all processes are welcome. That's it.
Thank you, ladies. I think ultimately there's been so many different kind of narratives and political conversations in the industry, disagreements, etc., that the industry really needs some impartial kind of mediators and people that can share the concerns of the industry and still be seen as impartial without over kind of, it's one company that's invested that does all the lobbying and we sponsor all the groups. Without that kind of steadying voice, I don't think any progress politically gets made. No MPs really listen to what's going on, and no one really trusts a voice when it's just my company that's leading it. It makes a huge difference when, you've got people at the center who are just trying to coordinate, mediate, and then also liaise and represent that group that they're a part of. And so I super appreciate all the hard work that you ladies do, and all of the non-executive directors as well behind you that are part of the group, and the events you run, smashing, and the representation you do for the industry across the continent as well, incredibly impressive. And then also connecting up with all the Kiwis and all the Aussies as well makes a huge difference. And I think for anyone that's sort of on the fence about joining the CTA or who the CTA is, what it does, I think you've got a pretty good view today of all the hard work and the passion that goes into speaking to all the MPs, all the tireless conversations and dead ends politically that manifest. So big thank you to you both. And yeah, I think the medical mixer in the next couple of weeks is another great avenue for people to get involved with. And again, it's starting another conversation really, isn't it, around kind of medical perspectives. And so great holistic view that you've both got, and that's why I wanted to kind of have a bit of a discussion with you both, because you know exactly what's going on at the patient front. Sian kind of been there as well since the outset of the sector, to then see the frustrations, experience the frustrations, and then now kind of see the new, I guess, wave almost of companies and entrepreneurs that are coming in.
I think it's about knowing what battles to fight.
So yeah, anyone that's interested in the CTA, wants to learn a little bit more, Marika and Sian are, I wouldn't want to come on weekends, maybe not, but they are there 24/7. And although they do work weekends, they are there to support you. And thank you both. Maybe some final thoughts, conclusions from you both, things to look forward to from the Cannabis Trades Association and the UK cannabis sector.
Well, thanks, Christopher, for that interview. It was great. Thoughts for the sector? Just keep smart. You know, we've got a lot of information we can give you, and join us. What's stopping you? The countries from international companies are joining us. What's stopping you from joining us? We're giving them all the information they need, which might be, as a competitor, beneficial to you too.
So my last thoughts are, first of all, I'm absolutely delighted that Chris Tasker sits on our board, because not only does he lend a very different view of how this industry is put together, he also supports us with his scientific rigor and his teams and his training packages, which are really superb. So thank you for that, Chris. That's the Mutual Admiration Society. So what would I like to leave everybody with? I don't believe in hope, okay? Because hope is the last bastion of despair, okay? I believe in taking small incremental steps forward together. And that means that if you're part of what we do, we will look after you, we'll look after the industry, but you can't infight anymore. We need a united front. We need it saying the same thing and walking in the same direction. You know, the days of the wild entrepreneur pirate are gone. This is for the long term. This is everybody's futures here. So please come and join us, given that you won't have to pay additional marketing expenses, lobbyists, special legal advice and regulatory advice. You get a bit of PR and promotion out of it, and you understand what's actually going on in the sector. So that's my plug, my elevator plug. We'd be delighted to speak to you. If you want to join us, we're the easiest people to get hold of. So please do. Chris, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to come here today.
Thank you, Chris.
Very much appreciated. What I'll do is put some of Marika and Sian's details in the description lower section of this video, and then everyone can just get in touch with you directly. And then I think what I'll do is put you guys in the lab and this podcast in the lab, so maybe people can message you through there too, and then they've got a direct stepping stone to get in touch with you. So thank you very much, guys, for listening. We really appreciate Sian and Marika coming and taking the time to walk us through this whole dynamic industry and all the nuances that go with it. And so if you want to fast track your journey to the center of the cannabis industry, Sian and Marika are right here. But otherwise, take an explore of the lab platform. It's expanding every day. There's new materials, resources, science going in there. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you all soon in the next episode of the podcast, I suppose, or in another interview. But no, thanks a lot, guys, and ciao for now.
Ciao for now.